2024 is already a great year for games, but the big question is, could it get better? Admittedly, March didn't have too many major releases, and barring some surprise releases, it looks like it may be the same for April as well. And unlike March, there isn't a major tentpole game like Dragon's Dogma 2. But hey, that just gives all of the other games a chance to actually sell some copies, you know? Barring any sudden surprises like game shadow drops and game delays, all dates featured in this video should be accurate, to the best of my abilities of course. So before we begin, if you like this video or any other video I make, please give it a like, subscribe, and spread the good gospel of high-tech lowlife to all of your friends. Doing all of this lets the YouTube algorithm know that I'm doing well, and it'll help this channel grow. So here's a list of games coming out in April, in chronological order. Some high profile, some low profile. So before we begin, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. That being April the 1st. April the 1st is an interesting time because it's April Fool's Day. Most of the really good April 1st stuff comes out on that day. But if we're talking about a game that's actually coming out on April the 1st, supposedly, then we need to talk about Dungeons and Cardboards. It's a top-down roguelike inspired by tabletop gaming, more specifically the aesthetics of tabletop gaming. It's hard to know whether or not this game will run properly on Steam Deck, but I think it might run properly given that it doesn't seem like a very graphically intense game. But the big question of course is, will the game even release on April the 1st? Releasing on April the 2nd is a game called Saviorless. It's a 2D action platformer, but with a more dark fantasy vibe. Of all the games releasing on this day, it's certainly the most interesting game I've seen so far. And honestly, I think this game will run pretty well on Steam Deck. I have no reason to believe that this would have any performance issues on deck. Releasing on April the 3rd is a game called Quit Today. You take the role of a disgruntled office employee. It's a 2D beat 'em up with roguelike elements. I don't see performance being an issue on the Steam Deck. Sometimes compatibility is an issue with these Chinese developed games on Steam Deck, but that hasn't been this way for a while now. Can't imagine there being any issues on Steam Deck. So this is kind of awkward. Buckshot Roulette was a game that I talked about last month. The game was ultimately delayed and now slated for release on April the 4th. To be honest, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the concept of deer hunting yourself with a double-barreled shotgun instead of a revolver. But I guess that's why we wait for April the 4th to come around. Next up is a game called Sons of Valhalla. It's a hybrid 2D action game mixed with a base building game. You know, this game kind of reminds me of those kingdom games, you know, the ones where you're on a horse and you have to build a kingdom and all that stuff. Yeah, that basically. And while graphically it looks like it could run pretty well on Steam Deck, it's hard to know given that these games are deceptively CPU intensive. But I guess there's only one way to find out. Sons of Valhalla releases on April the 5th. There's only one game releasing on April the 6th, and that's a game called Virvius. It's a boomer shooter, but it seems to take more inspiration from Quake rather than Doom. This one tends to be more of a retro throwback boomer shooter, so I think this game will run pretty well on Steam Deck. That said, the game isn't fully releasing on April the 6th, but rather it's going into early access. So if you are interested in this title, do keep that in mind. There's a good chance that I'll be talking about this game once again when a full release date is announced. There's one game releasing on April the 7th called Shadow Strikers. As someone that's kind of a fighting game aficionado, this game does look vaguely interesting on the surface, but at the same time though, it doesn't really instill any confidence in me. I have read the description and I watched the trailer, but there really isn't anything that really sticks out to me. Yes, there's juggling, but you know what else has juggling? Tekken, or basically any other 3D fighter out there. That said, I'm not really harping too much on this game because it's an independent fighting game. That said, I do wish the developers put more details about how the fighting system actually works, aside from having juggles and having combo strings and supposedly having easy mode combos. As for whether or not this game will run well on Steam Deck, I'm sure it will run well, but it's hard to know these days. Of all the games releasing on April the 8th, this seems like the most popular upcoming title, Spirit City Lo-Fi Sessions. It's supposedly not a game, but a gamified focus tool. By the developer's own admission, it's not really a game, so I can't really harp too much on it, but it doesn't really seem like the kind of tool that appeals to me. But lo-fi does sound pretty nice. That said, I think this quote-unquote gamified focus tool will live and die by the soundtrack. Will this tool run on Steam Deck? Probably. But again, given its status as a focus tool, it's not necessarily the best fit for Steam Deck. It's probably best for your PC. There's also the big question of what's just stopping me from pulling up Lo-Fi Girl on YouTube while I do my work. I do think that's something the developer will have to address. Releasing on April the 9th is gigantic. It's an older MOBA that was released a while ago and was shut down, only to be revived again by Gearbox. It's more like a MOBA than a hero shooter. I suppose the only caveat is that if you're releasing a MOBA in 2024, you have to contend with League, and also Dota 2, and also, to a smaller degree, Smite. As for whether or not this game will run on Steam Deck, I mean, graphically it'll probably run well on Steam Deck, but given that this is a MOBA, aka an online game, there's no guarantee that the developers will let you play this on Steam Deck, given, you know, anti-cheat. If the anti-cheat isn't invasive enough and doesn't work on Linux, then you can kiss your dream of playing Gigantic on your Steam Deck goodbye. But if you're looking for a single-player experience that releases on April the 9th, then look no further than Children of the Sun. It's a puzzle shooter. You do shoot one bullet, but you can control that bullet and use that one bullet to redirect your positioning and kill all the cultists in a single level. It's a very interesting premise, and it's published by Devolver Digital, so I have faith that this will be a decent game. For what it's worth, the game is already Steam Deck verified, so there's a very good chance that this game will run really well on Steam Deck. The next game on this list is Turbo Kid, releasing on April the 10th. It's a Metroidvania with a focus on bicycle traversal. I talked about this game during a prior Metroidvania video, but it seems like an interesting premise. I will say the original demo that I tried out on my Steam Deck many months ago did not work well on Steam Deck. I think the developers may have fixed it, but honestly, I'd have to try the demo out again. But if everything works well, then I think this game should run pretty well on Steam Deck. Releasing on April the 11th is PathBlasters. It's a competitive sort of Bomberman sort of game, except you're racing instead of blowing up your enemies. You blow your obstacles and whoever makes it to the end first wins, obviously. I think I'd be interested in trying this game out. I want to see how this runs on Steam Deck, but I'm sure it'll run pretty well on Steam Deck. I mean, it's a 2D game. I have no reason to believe that this wouldn't run well on Steam Deck, unless there's an anti-cheat that doesn't let you play on deck. Releasing on April the 12th is a game called Inspire. This one's also a top-down shooter, but it's not supposed to be a looter shooter, but rather just a more standard top-down shooter. You have more dynamic control over your actions, including the ability to fly over your enemies and terrain as well. This game actually looks super interesting, but it's hard to know whether or not this game will actually run on Steam Deck. I think it stands a pretty good chance of running on Steam Deck. There's only 2 games releasing on April the 13th, and this one looked like the more interesting of the two. It's a more linear 2D action platformer game. The game looks alright, I guess. It was either this or an MMORPG, and I think this would have been a better choice overall. I have no reason to believe that this game wouldn't run well on Steam Deck. I think this game would run pretty well on Steam Deck. And as of the making of this video, there's no game releasing on April the 14th at all. Not a single one, not even a single shovelware title at all, which makes my job a little easier, but it is weird. Things get more interesting on April the 15th with Dream Tactics. It's self-described as a GBA-style strategy RPG, but this time with deck building. You know, when they say GBA-style strategy game, it's basically a dead ringer for Fire Emblem. The GBA Fire Emblems, I mean, which is a good thing because I really liked the GBA Fire Emblem titles. As for performance on Steam Deck, I mean, this game's already Steam Deck verified. I am curious as to how some games get Steam Deck verified this early, but still. Even without the verification badge, I think this game would run pretty well on Steam Deck as well. As someone that loves turn-based strategy RPGs, I think this is really up my alley. Releasing on April the 16th is another tactical turn-based RPG, Guild Saga: Vanished Worlds. This one seems more inspired by classic CRPGs, like classic isometric titles. I think this game would also run pretty well on Steam Deck as well. I want to get this game too. Dang it, there's so many strategy RPGs coming out. Next up is Kingsgrave, releasing on April the 17th. It kind of looks similar to Legend of Zelda, and it's self-styled as a sort of Metroidvania inspired by The Legend of Zelda. The trailer puts a lot of emphasis on using your mind. While my mind thinks that this would be a good candidate for a Steam Deck title, and I think this will run pretty well on Steam Deck as well. I have no reason to believe otherwise. April the 18th is where things start to get really interesting. Developed by the same guys that developed Ori and the Blind Forest and its sequel, this is a very different type of game. A lot of people say it's an ARPG like Diablo, but I see it more as like a top-down Souls-like. Moon Studios is always on top of their game when it comes to visual design, and this game looks very exciting. That said, will it run on Steam Deck? I certainly think it might run on Steam Deck. At the very least, I think it'll run at 30 FPS, if not a stable 60 FPS. The only thing that baffles me is why people seem to think this is some sort of ARPG like Diablo, just because it's top down. I should also mention that this game is releasing in early access. Releasing on April the 19th is this unusual game called CYBER.one, Racing for Souls. It seems like a sort of open world car combat type of game. The game could be interesting, but the trailer doesn't really answer that many questions for me. This is also another early access title. This game seems like it could run on Steam Deck, but given how unstable early access is, it's very possible that the game just doesn't run on Steam Deck at all. That actually goes for all of the early access games I've talked about. As of the making of this video, there's only 3 games slated for release on 4/20. And of course, they all look like asset flip titles, so I'm not going to cover them. There's also no games releasing on April the 21st, which by the way is a Sunday. Released on April the 22nd is Dead Island 2. Dead Island 2 is a game that was Epic exclusive, but is now available on Steam. Yes, people have already tested out Dead Island 2 on Steam Deck, and we know that it runs pretty well, like around 40 to 50 FPS on all low settings. April 23rd is going to be an exciting day. Well, exciting for me at least. There are 3 interesting games releasing this day, all of which I will cover in this video. This is Eiyuden Chronicle, 100 Heroes, a true spiritual successor to Suikoden. This game was successfully kickstarted. That said, I've actually never played a Suikoden game in my life. I probably should at some point, but this'll be good enough for now. I have no reason to believe this game wouldn't run well on Steam Deck. Both Octopath Traveler and Star Ocean run pretty well, and they both have the same sort of 3D, HD 2D look. This is one for the ages. Next up is Phantom Fury, the sequel to Ion Fury. Ion Fury was more inspired by older Duke Nukem titles, even running on the same build engine. That said, Phantom Fury is still very much a boomer shooter. I actually really liked Ion Fury, and so Phantom Fury seems like it's going to be a slam dunk, something that the boomer shooter crowd will definitely enjoy. But the big question is, will this game run on Steam Deck? I have no reason to believe that it won't, as per usual, but who knows. And of course, the third game released on April the 23rd is Tales of Kenzera, Zao. It's a Metroidvania inspired by African mythology. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not really familiar with African mythology myself, but I am willing to learn, and to be honest, I won't say no to a Metroidvania. Tales of Kenzera, not to be confused with any of the Tales series by Bandai Namco game, looks pretty fun. The big worry, of course, is whether or not this game will run well on Steam Deck. But given that Prince of Persia was also a Metroidvania that was published by a major AAA studio and ran pretty well on Steam Deck, I firmly believe that this game will also run pretty well on Steam Deck as well. April the 24th is the host to no less than 2 separate Backrooms games. You know, the Backrooms are interesting, but if I had to be honest with you, I've yet to see a good Backrooms game. This could be interesting, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And while the graphics are decently detailed, they're not so detailed that it won't run well on Steam Deck. I think this game could run well on Steam Deck, but only if the developers optimize. April the 25th is also going to be an interesting time as well. 3 interesting looking titles, the first of which we're going to talk about is Sandland. Based on short manga by legendary manga author Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball. I'm not going to lie to you, initially I wasn't too interested in Sandland, but the passing of Akira Toriyama made me realize just how much his works mean to me. And as such, I really owe it to the man that basically created my childhood. I'm going to check out Sandland when it releases. I can't really comment on whether or not it'll run on Steam Deck. I think it might run on Steam Deck, but probably at like a 30 FPS cap. Also releasing on the same day is Another Crab's Treasure. Aggro Crab is a great developer. I actually really like their other game, Going Under. Whereas Going Under was basically Dead Rising if it were a roguelike, Another Crab's Treasure is basically a Souls-like. I've actually tried out the demo on the Steam Deck a while ago, and it's a demo, so demos aren't representative of the final game, including performance, but from what I've experienced in the demo ran pretty well on Steam Deck. I can only imagine the full title running even better on Steam Deck. And of course, the last interesting game released on April the 25th is Saga, Emerald Beyond. It's a new entry in the Saga franchise, like a completely new title. The game does look interesting, but I have to confess, I've never actually played any of the Saga titles. I haven't played Romancing Saga or even the other Saga titles that have released. Wow, that's the second time this video I've admitted to never playing a classic JRPG series. Anyways, will it run on Steam Deck? I certainly believe it will. It looks like it's going for a more stylized look, so I have reason to believe that it won't be too graphically demanding. But it is a turn-based RPG, so you could comfortably play it at 30 FPS. At least, I think you could. Releasing on April the 26th is a Touhou game, Touhou Lens Night Sky, Kaseigai. It takes after more traditional Touhou gameplay, that being a vertical shoot 'em up, but this time, it's a roguelike. Touhou games are infamously difficult, especially at lunatic difficulty. Yes, I get it, they're nowhere near as hard as Doranpachi, but I think they're still pretty hard. Will this game run well on Steam Deck? I think it'll run pretty well, at least until you get to like the bullet hell. And bullet hell games are kind of an interesting case because you want the lag. The lag slows the game down and as such slows the bullets down, meaning you can dodge them. And the last game on this list is Yolk Heroes, along Tamago. It's a throwback to the old Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles. You are tasked with raising this hero from an egg, a Yolk hero, if you will. It's a sort of life and training simulator where you train this hero to become stronger, grow up, and ultimately defeat your foes. It's a cute little concept, and I can't wait to see how this turns out, and I have no reason to believe that a game styled after the Game Boy and Game Boy Color wouldn't run well on Steam Deck. This game releases on April the 30th, literally at the end of the month. And that about covers it for this video. There's no game releasing on April the 27th, and there's no games of interest that are releasing on April the 28th or April the 29th. Am I doing you a disservice by not talking about the games that I'm personally not interested in? I don't think I'm doing you guys a disservice because I know if I'm not interested in the game, my audience definitely won't be. Especially if it's recycled ideas and also literal asset flips. So that about covers it for April titles. I don't think April has any major tentpole titles, no Dragon's Dogma 2 or anything of the sort, but as a fan of RPGs, there are definitely a ton of games you shouldn't miss. If you like this video, please press the like button and check out our other videos, and if you like those other videos as well, be sure to press the subscribe button and share the good gospel of high-tech lowlife with your friends. Furthermore, we have a community Discord for enlightened individuals such as you. And if you wish to further support high-tech lowlife, be sure to check out our Patreon page, links in the description.